Alright, welcome back everyone. This is Shadow Drake, and this topic will be the PID controller. Now, the devs, when the terrain rework got added a special new device called the PID controller, or it's just basically a PID controller, and you find it actually in the logic processors kit. So for 2 gold, 2 copper, you actually get a PID controller chip, and it kind of tells you what it's supposed to do. But I can go over what's the purpose of a PID? If you're not into some kind of like systems processes, this might sound unusual to you, but in a sense, it is a type of controller that looks at an error and it provides a corrective number that you use to a process to fix it. Unfortunately, trying to set up this PID controller fresh off the made me feel more like you made me do this.
Cognition critical. Health critical.
Yeah, just like that. Ugh. Okay, I wanted to pull my hair out. I just wanted to kill it. So, I'm just gonna go over this video, talk briefly about what a PID controller does, how it works. I'm gonna talk about the bugs currently with the setup as of this video. I hope to get rectified and fixed so that it's easier to set up. Then I'll go over a chips case, and then I think I'll finally have a fuel mixing setup and a GFG setup to just go over. So feel free to skip around as you need it. So the first thing, a PID controller. Now, how this works, it basically calculates a number for you to use in a process. And how it does that is you give it a set point, it looks at a process variable, and it calculates an error from that, how far off it is. And then it applies 3 different types of numerical gains or proportions to it to spit out a number. And then you take this number and put it in a corrective process so that it can slowly correct the error and fix it. Now, this sounds kind of nebulous, but I guess a good use case for this would be, let's just think about a gas mixer. So fuel mix is 2 volatiles, 1 oxygen, 2-to-1 ratio. So you want 66.6% volatiles. So let's just say that's your set point. You want 66.6% volatiles in this fuel mixing pipe. And you're reading a pipe analyzer on this pipe to get the ratio of volatiles. So that's your process variable. What the pipe analyzer is giving you is your process variable. What you want it to be is your set points. So now let's say your pipe analyzer spits out a value and it says it's 60%. Well, now it looks at your 66% and your 60%, and you get an error of 6%. So there you go. Your PID controller has an error of 6%. So you got an error of 6, and then this is where the 3 different gains come. You have proportional, integral, and derivative gains. That's why it's called a PID controller. So depending on which ones you use, it's a PID for all 3, PI for just proportional and integral, ID for integral derivative, just P or PD or ID. You're never going to have one that's just pure D. So it's going to apply these numbers to that 6 in some way. It spits out a number, and then you use this number to fix, like for example, your gas mixer. So it really is a feedback device. It looks at an error, calculates a number, you've put this feedback into your process, and it's supposed to help correct you to get your ratios to match. And because of this, there's quite a lot to do with tuning it, and you can look in the wiki for how to tune these things, but I'll give you some rough guidelines. I'm not an expert at this. I know how to work with them, so let's just go over them. So let's go over the 3 gains. So the first one, of course, is the proportional gain. This just directly multiplies with the error you calculate. So, 66 minus 6, you have an error of 6. Depending on what your proportional gain is, this multiplies with your 6 to spit out a number at you. So if your proportional gain is a 1, then all it spits out is 6. If your proportional gain is 2, it'll spit out 12, and so on and so forth. And so what this does for you is that this is basically an immediate do this to try to correct it type process. So the higher proportional gain, the stronger the effect that it's going to try to do to fix this error. So this can have a downside in that if your proportional gain is too high, you will overcorrect. So maybe, you see an error of 6. it overcorrects, and now your the process variable is 72. Well, you went too far on the other end. Now instead of you being 6 under, you're 6 over. So now it's going to spit out, the opposite of that gain. And then once that happens, let's say you go right back down to 60. Well, now you're just oscillating between the two. So you're just constantly stuck in 60, 72, so on and so forth. And that's not what you want for a proportional gain. You want it in such a way that you either get progressively fix the error, 60, 61, 62, 60, so forth, or you want to overcorrect a little bit, maybe 60, then hit 69, then the next time it hits 65, the next time it hits 66.9, and then so on. It slowly tapers out to correct itself. But anyway, so that's the proportional gain. Is the main driver for trying to correct the error that you have. Next is the integral gain. Now this looks at the overall accumulated error before you multiply the gain. And so this essentially tries to bring it in line slowly. So let's go back to that same example. Let's say your error was 6. So for the first second, it remembers 6. Your error was 6. We apply our integral gain, 6. So our corrective action will be a value of 6. Well, the next second, your error is now 5. Well, the total error that's happened is 6 plus 5. So you have a total error of 11. So then you have your integral gain applying 11. So as you can see, this can kind of ramp up slowly, and this is to try to get it also to fix itself. But it is kind of like a memory type thing, because as you get closer to the fix, then the integral will stop gaining. But once it exceeds on the other side, if it goes too much, well, now it starts decreasing. So like, let's say by the time it got to the set point, you're at 40 on your integral as far as accumulated. And so it just remembers that 40. So you will always have the 40, and essentially it's that memory to help hold it there. Now this works on a process where something like the temperature for the fuel mixer could probably no longer be perfect. Like if your volatiles and oxygen fuel temperatures are different, this integral gain will help you keep that fix in line. So like if the gas mixer needs to be 70% volatiles to have a perfect mix, the integral gain will help to keep it. And as the temperature fixes and you have a little bit of error, your integral gain can increase or decrease as needed to help keep the error stable. That's kind of what this integral gain will do. It's just meant to hold like a memory to keep it. Because the thing between proportional and integral is if there's an error, you have a proportional component. But once you hit the set point, proportional goes away because that zeroes out. So then if you don't have integral, then if you need 70% to fix the process, well then once that's fixed, if that 70% came from proportional, well then it's going to go right back down to what number it originally was. You're going to reintroduce the error, which you're then going to fix again with proportional. And so that's what the integral hopes to fix. It remembers that, and it tries to keep that value to keep it stable. Now we're going to look at the derivative. Derivative is the final one, and it looks at the rate of change in the error. And that one's a little bit harder to visualize, to work with, but in a sense it does try to resist how fast the error can change as a dampener when it's a negative. It also can try to help give it a little extra push to help correct it faster. And so what I mean by that is if on the first second the error changed from 0 to 6, well, you have an error change of 6. So that's what your derivative looks at. So from 1 second to the next, it changed by 6. Now, if the next second it goes to 5, well, the error only changed by 1. So now the derivative is using that 1, 6 minus 5, 1. That's what your derivative gain is going to look at. And you see, in a sense, it can be a resistive element to force, the PID from pushing a strong fix too quick, but it can also be something that can help drive it. And that's why the derivative cannot fix things. It only looks at the rate of change of error. So yeah, that's the 3 gains. Probably overcomplicating it. All I know that's hopefully what you can take away is P and I will help to fix things in different ways. D just kind of either helps give it a boost or to slow down the rate of change. So talking about our PID controller, I had to do some tests to find out exactly roughly what the numbers came out to be. Now, like I said, proportional is directly your set point minus your PV, and then the gain, proportional gain directly multiplies to that. So that's simple, that's easy to calculate. Now with the integral, it does accumulate. So depending on what PV minus SP is, so you have that error, it's multiplied by 0.25. It could be 0.5. It's kind of hard to tell because of the tick system. I don't know if it's activating faster than that. I'm seeing changes of 0.25 and I'm seeing changes of 0.5. So I don't know if I'm capturing it before a tick happens, after a tick happens, per sec. But so I'm going to presume 0.25 and then it multiplies it by the integral. And that's your integral error accumulation, how that affects the value. Same thing with derivative. I also not sure how close this is, but it seems like it looks at the change of error, multiplies it by 0.8, and then multiplies by the derivative gain. And this one is an interesting one to me because it does eventually zero out. It's like it keeps applying that 0.8 to whatever that value was, and then until it slowly tapers away. So if the error is not changing, it will eventually zero out. But so long as the error is changing, you get some derivative out of it. And so that's the basics. That's kind of what you see here. So let's go over kind of like a case example. So for my case example here, let me get my screwdriver. This is basically a PID chip. I have an IC10 that's reading the PID chip so that I can read the P, the I, the D, the min, and the max. That's basically how high the values will reach or how low they will reach. The setting that's being spit out by the PID, and then the set point is down here. Now, this has been frustrating, so we're going to talk about the bugs with this setup. Now, how a PID works, like I said, right now all I have is proportional gain of 2. This dial right here is my quote process variable dial. So when I change this, it'll we'll subtract from a set point, multiply it by my proportional gain, and that's what I expect to see up here. So if I decrease it by 1, well, 10 minus 9 is 1. Multiply by 2 for proportional gain, I get a 2 out. So that's all well and good. Getting this out, getting this far is actually very difficult. So let's go over the bugs that I've noticed with this setup. Now, as far as the chip goes, you can set the in and the var very easily. Those actually work. You use your screwdriver, you set it. In this case, I set it to the dial, and I'm looking at setting. So yeah, that easy to work with. And then you have your P, I, and D. So it looks like you're able to set this differently. However, as I found out through these three different bugs in different ways, this isn't the case. So bug number 1, and I really hope they all get fixed. The labeler does not adjust this at all. So if I change this to 5 with the labeler, you'll see that it did not change at all. It's still a 2. If I look at the configuration tab, that proportional gain is still a 2. So that's one bug. The labeler does not fix or adjust anything. If I were to use a screwdriver, however, you see I change it down to 1. And as you see, it is a 1 right now. As far as this goes, it is a 1. However, when I decrease this, you see that I still incremented by 2. Because remember, it should have changed. Even if this didn't change, this is a 2. 10 minus 9 was 1 times the original 2, put me at 2. But now with the proportional gain of 1, I should have expected that to stay at 2 or go up to a 3. Instead, it went up to a 4, which means it didn't even accept this value whatsoever. So let's press the reset button. And as you can tell, the reset button still didn't take that proportional gain of 1. That number should have dropped down to a 2 because 10 minus 8 is 2 times 1 would be 2, yet my PID is still spitting out a 4. So that's bug number 2. The screws do not work. Not only can the labeler not change these, but the screwdriver also does not change them. Which means currently, the only way to change anything on the PID is to hard code it. So what I'm going to do is increase this to a 3, and you can see it did change to a 3. Now, when I increase this back to 1, you see that I went down by 3. So, in a sense, it did work. Changing it with logic setting did fix it, and it did change it. However, now you see that my numbers are kind of off. 10 minus 9 is 1, times 3 is 3. I should have expected a 3 here. So now the whole chip is in a wonky state where it's not giving me the right control value. And that's what the reset button is for, to correct it. And as you can see, now it's back to 3, and that fixes things. So yeah, that's technically bug number 3. We have to use the reset button. We have to give it a reset pulse in order for this thing to be properly configured and work correctly. So yeah. With that being the case, let me just show briefly. You saw how easy proportional gain was. So let me show what the others two do. So we're gonna bring the integral gain up to 1, and you can see that my number is increasing. Let me get it to 10, and let's reset it, and let's go back down. And you see that I went up by 0.25 for one tick, and now I am going by 0.5. And it's going to keep doing that until it hits the maximum of 10. So now it's at 10, it's maxed out. That's the integral at work. If I go the other way, which is really weird that it's going down. I must be like slightly lower, but if I go down to 11, that should be -1. That's why it should be going down. Yeah, the dials are not perfect. Apparently it reads like a fractional number, which is really weird and confusing sometimes. But you saw what I meant. If I went up, basically I'm over, the number comes out negative, so it's going to start decreasing. If I am under, the number goes positive, and it's going to start increasing. So that's how it works. So that's the integral gain. And now we're going to see the derivative gain. So we're going to get that to a 1, reset it again just to make sure it all works. And when I increase it once, you see I get that 0.8, and then that number slowly tapers off. Negative, of course. If I change it again, you do see that change gave that spike of number. So every time I change it, you see that number spike up and show up. So that's the effect of the derivative gain. And you see that it is tapering off because over a course of time, no change is happening, so it slowly decreases back to 0. So this was my test setup to get this thing working and to figure it out and to understand what's truly going on. This does use IC10 though, so just keep that in mind. To properly set up your PID chip, you actually need to write all 6 of these data logics. You need to write your minimum and maximum, and that completely depends on the process you're doing. You need to write your set points that you want, and then you also need to write your P, I, and D. And then finally, make sure you have a reset button for a reset pulse to reset the thing, because it can be easy to mess it up. Now, I wanted to come up with use cases for this thing without IC10, and unfortunately, because of this complexity that these pins don't work, if you really want a full-scale control of the PID chip, you need several memory logic readers and logic writers. So basically, that's the 6 parameters here. You see, I have my set point, my minimum, my maximum, my P, my I, and D, so that if I change any one of these memories, it gets written to a PID, and then it just works. It's just frustrating. That's the frustrating part about this thing. So, yeah, and this is not very new player friendly to have to do this, so I try to condense it down. So I did condense it down. Of course, the reset signal. I condensed it down to just having the reset signal, which is a button, reader, and writer. And then it's cumbersome, but if you just have a memory, a reader, and a writer, you can see that that's basically duplicated throughout the thing. What you can do is shut off the writer, change the out variable, for any one of the 6 gains, adjust your memory, turn it on, and it'll write it into the chip. So that is an option, and that's kind of what we're going to explore. So let's move on to our examples. So the first thing will be the fuel mixer. All right. So let's go to the fuel mixing setup. So I try to keep this to be exactly just chips. And so to talk about the fuel mixing setup, uh, a gas mixer will need, the setting value is a number from 0 to 100. So, got to work with that. Now, ideally, you want a 66.6% ratio of volatiles. And so that's kind of what is going on here. And this PID is going to be looking at this pipe analyzer to kind of see what we have here and then make adjustments to it to try to fix this in the case the temperatures are wrong. Now with this setup over here, I do have an oxygen tank that is being chilled down by this liquid pollutants, and I have a volatile tank that is being heated up by this liquid nitrous to force them to get out of temps. When volatiles and oxygen match, then the setting that you need is a very easy 66, is basically 66 or 67%, and that'll basically get you pretty much the perfect fuel mix, when the temps match. However, when the temps don't match, you're going to see this be completely thrown off, and I'm going to turn this filter off so that I stop that, You're going to see the mix is off. Well, you see, with that, what did I do with my thing? With the different temperatures, you see that I actually have less volatiles because they were warmer, yet, and more oxygen. And so that means that this mixer is off. And so while we do have PV equals and our Tmat that we can do to correct this, an alternate way of doing this will be to use a PID. We can read this ratio of volatiles and then seek to correct it with the PID controller to adjust the setting here. And that's what this whole chip setup is for. Now, this is the reset button for fixing the PID in case it's got in an awkward state. This is basically that whole condensed thing where I just, set the memory chip and write a specific parameter to the PID to get it set up. And once it's done, I don't necessarily need this unless I gotta tune something. Now, the value that PID gives me is taken by this math unit, and it's going to add it to my 66.66, percent. That's the target ideal rates for the gas mixer. So, it takes this PID value plus the memory, and it's going to add them together, and then that number is taken by the logic writer and then written to the gas mixer to try to correct this issue. So, in short, this thing is going to be monitoring the volatile state here, and it's going to try to fix it as, if the ratio is wrong. Now, as far as this is concerned, setting one up isn't necessarily difficult, but it does require knowing your process. So with that, the best way that the PID can work is it gives you a number, and then you use it to directly affect some other process. That's what the whole math unit is here. Like, I could have this PID generate a value to directly write to the gas mixer. The problem with that would be that I need to make sure that I have a decent enough proportional and integral gain to kind of work off of that. And I'll be relying on the integral gain to get a happy median, happy setting to make sure that it all works right. So yeah, and that's kind of why I suggest that you take this number, you modify it to some other number, and then you write that. So let's explain what I did a bit. So now, for obvious reasons, my set point is going to be 0.667. That's what I want the ratio of volatiles to be. Now, of course, what it's looking at is the pipe analyzer, and it's looking at ratio of volatiles. Now, that's going to be a small number. That's going to be really, really small, to be honest. That's, zero. It's going to be a ratio, so it's going to be 0. Ideally, we want it to be 0.667. So I'm working on the decimal things, set points and decimals. Now, the mins and maximums are based on what I expect the gas mixer to do. So it can only go from 0 to 100. And I'm starting at 66.6. So I chose a maximum of 34 because I want this PID to be able to get the gas mixer to 100 if it needs the maximum change. So, 34 plus 66 is roughly 100. That's why I chose 34 as the maximum. However, this needs to control it in case I don't need to feed too much volatiles and instead need to feed oxygen. So I put the minimum at negative 67 because, 67 minus 67 is roughly 0. And when it's at 0, then it'll be pushing more only oxygen in. So that's what the PID is doing. As far as the gains, proportional gain, integral, and derivative gain, I kind of just chose these numbers and kind of work with them. This is not a very well-tuned system, and it definitely shows that it's not very well-tuned because of the way it is. But I did choose numbers that, a small ratio, if an error is 0.01, then, a proportional gain of 20 means that 0.01 will be 0.2. So I'm hoping that, that's not too high to force too big of a change, but enough to kind of elicit some change. And meanwhile, my integral and derivative gain are just kind of there to kind of help smooth it out. But again, this is not very well tuned. So what I'm going to do is turn on this filtration to kind of keep cycling those through. I'm going to go on ahead and turn these on to kind of keep forcing the temp change. And then I'm just going to turn the gas mixer on. So now, as we're watching this, you will see that, right now, it's obviously too volatile heavy right now. And that's why you see that the PID is constantly changing this down to kind of go towards the oxygen. Now, I did have it originally set to too low volatile, so that's why I kind of capped out. So now it's trying to desperately fix that. Oh, but you see, now that we've gone past that, now that the oxygen is too rich, now that PID is going to be trying to fix that to go back to more volatiles. So that's kind of what the whole process of this PID is. Oh wait, it's still too, sorry, my bad. It's still too volatile rich, so it's going further into the negatives to get more oxygen through. And the closer this fixes, then eventually input 1 will start increasing because I need more volatiles, and input 2 will start decreasing because I need less oxygen. And that just takes some time for this to work. This is what I mean, it's not properly tuned. It's not working fast enough. But as you can tell, the oxygen is fixing, the oxygen ratio is fixing. And so eventually what this means is this negative number is going to start decreasing, and I'm going to see pretty bad oscillations happening because now I'm going to have too much oxygen, and I need to fix that with more volatiles. So it's a steady swing. But as you can tell, it is working to slowly correct this. It's just that as of right now, that's not very well tuned. And eventually this process will be kind of very well tuned and can work just right. But this has to iterate over quite a lengthy amount of time. Just because the gains I've chosen are not very good. So we'll leave this alone. We'll leave this running so that we can go to a second use case. Because when I come back, I expect this to be more or less fixed, but it'll take some time. So let's go to the next case, and that is a gas fuel generator controlling how much is being generated versus consumed. Now, what I've done with this one, that's just basically nitrogen being pushed in to kind of keep that room cool, and I got some radiators trying to cool the nitrogen. Nothing too big. So what controls the power being generated is this single pressure regulator that's pumping in only certain room temperature fuel to the gas fuel generator to control how much power is being produced. Now, what this IC10 chip is doing is it is controlling this PID to adjust the set point dynamically to determine what the settings need to be. Every 120 ticks, so roughly a minute, every minute, it looks at the new state of how much power is being consumed, and it throws that into the PID, that's the new set point. And then the PID is going to generate a setting that it gives to the chip. And then the chip tells the pressure regulator what to go to match this power, hopefully this power being generated, to what's being consumed. So now if I go on ahead and just bump all this power here, we're not going to see much of a change. So we're seeing that we need 10.3 kilowatts. Now before I did that, it's going to be roughly 3.5, 3.7 kilowatts, and that's what the chip is keeping it going. But now once it hits 120 here, we're going to have a state change. And we're going to see this try to match 10.3. Alright, so we got a state change. Now it needs to match 10.3. You see now, my GFG is getting ramped up to meet that demand. Hopefully ramps to 10.3. There you go. And that's what this PID is doing. And so in short, what I'm doing is I'm feeding the pressure regulator. The pressure regulator starts at a value of 50. Then it takes whatever value the PID has and adds that to 50. So that means the pressure regulator should be roughly 90. So I just launched myself into space. And when I come and look at the pressure regulator, you see that this is roughly 90, just like I said. Now, if I turn off this pipe, hopefully I did that in time, you know, now my power consumption is 710. So once it hits full tick, boom, now it needs to go down to 710. You see now my GFG is ramping down. You see that my PID is in the negatives now. So 50 minus wherever it gets to, once it gets down to roughly 400, I believe, is what it got to. Let's see where it settles at. It might be going down to 200. Okay. So negative 47. So yeah, it's the pressure regulator is probably set to like 3 or 2. Yep, there you go, 3 or 2. And so you see, that's another use for the PID. In a sense, it's matching what I need from the GFG to what is actually being consumed out here. And this is updating every minute. So now I put 7.28. It's going to reset. And it's going to go to 7.28. There you go. Now, the reason that PID will be useful for a gas fuel generator is because how much power the GFG creates is dependent upon the fuel temperature. So this is room temperature fuel. If this fuel was colder, I could generate more power for the same amount of pressure. If it was warmer, I generate less power for the same amount of pressure. So what it seeks to do is match this power consumption, tries to get the GFG to push out that much power by adjusting the pressure regulator setting. And no matter how hot or cold this fuel is, so long as I can provide that much power, then it's gonna keep controlling the GFG. And that's essentially what a PID is doing. In this case, my set point is whatever the actual power consumption is here. My process variable is the power actually being generated, and then my PID's gains, gains will adjust to fix, to get that power generation. And like I said, because I start with 50, I want the pressure regulator to go up to 100 max, so my max is 50, or to 0, negative 50. And as far as the gains go, because I'm in the kilowatts range, I'm gonna have some fairly large errors. My gains are really small to help work with this. Again, the proportional gain gives me a huge boost, and the integral gain helps to lock in my setting for that time. It could be done better, but again, limitations on the PID. I can't just change the set point and expect it to work dynamically. I have to give it a reset pulse. So every minute, that's why you see the power just fluctuate. It starts and then it ramps back up. Let's go back and check on this. Ah, see? Alright, so according to the PID, I am almost at the perfect numbers. Still fluctuating a bit, still trying to settle, but I'm no longer fluctuating as crazily. Again, that just means that my gains are set way too small to get a decent response time. But if I were to just actually stop messing with the temperatures, this will settle out. And I will finally have a gas mixer input setting that actually keeps my fuel ratio at what it needs to be. So I hope this kind of helps you see that the PID chip can work standalone with chips if you choose to have it used with chips. I do highly recommend that it's always added to something, but you definitely need to know this process. Uh, Knowing your process helps you get this thing correct, because if you mess up in the setup on the process, this thing is going to go way out of whack very quickly, very easily. Um,
Power low.
yeah, power low. So just remember that the PID tries to give you a corrective number. You want to be, your process that you do has to be capable of going both ways in the corrective process. I don't see this working very well for, like, example, controlling a volume pump from the volatile side to fix the ratio here. I don't see it working very well because while yes, it could correct it by adding, putting the volume pump worth of volatiles in there, it can't take out volatiles. It'll only go one way. So if you overcorrect, this will put in too much volatiles into here, and then how is it going to fix? The PID is not going to be able to fix it. It's going to see that error, and it's going to try to give you a number to help correct it. But if you didn't do it right, you might actually be making the error worse. Like if you set the setting 0 to 10, the PID should only give you a 0 when the setting matches perfectly. If there's some error, if there's too little volatiles, it might tell your volume pump needs to be pumping 5 liters. Well, what if you overshoot? Now you have too much volatiles. Well, it needs to try to correct that error by giving you the opposite function. But you can't write a -5 to a volume pump, especially if you set it from 0 to 10. Then, the PID is going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to try to go negative, but instead of going negative, it's just going to actually, quote, go positive and give you 5 again, which is going to make the problem worse. So you do need to know your process. You do need to be careful before you set one up, and definitely test it out. And yeah, this thing will eventually fix itself. Alrighty, guys. That's the PID chip. It is a powerful tool. It's definitely something that can work with an IC10. In fact, I kind of recommend the IC10 solution to work with it, because that actually works really, really well for this GFG. And hope to see you next time. And I am slowly working on mapping out all of the rocket space maps and coming up with the color codes for the deep minor regions. So hopefully I'll get that out eventually. Hope to see you then. Thank you and have a good day. Bye bye.